Okay. So, first up, how did you get your start in the brewing industry?
So I was a postdoctoral fellow, University of Sheffield, in the Department of Microbiology, studying enzymes. I'm a biochemist, and I've done my PhD and my postdoc work on enzymology. And saw an advertisement in the New Scientist, and they wanted an enzymologist to work on brewing topics at the Brewing Research Foundation. That was in 1978. And so I applied, and went for interview on the Thursday, and the job offer was with me on Saturday. So I thought, they want me, and so I went. And so that's exactly how it happened.
Okay. What has changed over your tenure as a brewing chemist, and what has stayed the same?
As my tenure?
Your tenure.
Yeah, not 10 years, 40 years. What's changed in brewing?
Mm-hmm.
The fundamental shape of the brewing process has remained the same. What has changed is obviously the nature of the brewing business in terms of the so-called craft industry, and a huge increase in the number of brewing companies, not only in the United States and the UK, which are the two countries that I've lived, but also all over. There's been an acceptance that an increasing preparedness of people to challenge the status quo. So people are not satisfied just to sort of accept things the way they always were, and they want to, a good example would be really cloudy beer. For most beers over the years, that has been considered to be offensive. I still consider it to be offensive, apart from Hefeweizens. But nonetheless, people are embracing it. And it's all about storyline, and it's all about trying to get a niche in the market. And hey, look, we are different, we are doing this, we are putting, stag semen in the beer, or whatever.
Novelty.
Yeah. So that is different. And obviously there's been this huge growth in this consolidation at the other extremes. You've got all these craft brewers, so-called craft brewers, but you've also got this development of megalomaniac, and that's not the right word, but huge brewing concerns. I know it's a Bush InBev, far away bigger than anybody else, this monolithic company. That's not the right word either. I don't know what the right word is. But yeah, probably too big.
Close to monopoly, kind of.
It is. It's whatever they are, 35% of the world's beer volume and so on. Mm-hmm. And basically a banking company that is, shuffling money. And it just happens that they deal in alcohol. So all that's changed. And the other thing that's changed is a shift away from brewing companies doing research. When I first joined the brewing industry, all of the significantly sized brewing companies in the world had very big research programs. And they were doing fairly fundamental work and publishing it. And so in the UK we had 6 big brewing companies, and they all had research teams. And they were all competing with the Brewing Research Foundation, who they were paying for anyway. And they were all competing to see who could be the first to discover these new things. And then the bean counters came in and said, this is crazy. This is, what do we get from it? What is the contribution to the bottom line? And the answer is not a lot. And so one by one, they were all scrapped. So there's very little fundamental research being done in brewing companies. The only really shining lights are in Japan, where people like Asahi and Kirin are doing some fairly basic research. You go to Asahi, I've got a close relationship with Asahi. I work with Asahi, and you go in and they've not got 1 GCMS, they got 50. And they're doing some fairly basic research and publishing it, and that's sort of a throwback to what it used to be like. Miller used to have a huge research program. Labatt in Canada, they like a little university. Bass, when I was research manager in Bass after the Brewing Research Foundation, I had a team of 30 scientists doing fairly fundamental work, genetic modification, all sorts of stuff.
Who's sort of taken over that role now if brewers aren't
Well,
doing it?
nobody basically. Obviously,
Universities?
it's happening in universities, but on a fairly small scale, really, relatively speaking, globally. Obviously, there's some notable universities, present company included, and we probably publish more per capita, the capita being one, me, than any other brewing program in the world. And now some have got far more scientists, and therefore, in a year they may put out more papers, but on average per person, we're the number one. So they're doing it. And if I was the editor-in-chief of the Journal of the American Society of Brewing Chemists, and I did an analysis of where the papers are coming from, and the number one source of papers to the world's leading brewing journal, which is what it is and was, is European academia.
Really?
So it's Belgium, UK, Ireland, Germany. Number two was North American academia, so US and Canada. And number three was Japan, Japanese brewing company. So yeah, academia. Even my old organisation, the Brewing Research Foundation, which was paid for by a tax on barrels of beer brewed in the UK primarily. So it was automatic funding. That all changed. It basically went to membership, people paying if they wanted to. If they didn't want to, didn't have to. So it really went to a contract research organisation, handling primarily information, and doing projects that were being paid for specifically by people. So a much less secure, there was no safety net, and you were basically competing with anybody else to actually get that money. And they merged with somebody else, so it's now the Camden BRI. Different world. It's a totally different world. You got to remember that most of the research that needs to be done on brewing has been done. When you think about it, beer's been around for thousands of years, and obviously the research really with a vengeance started in the late 19th, early 20th century. So where we are now is, at the 90% level, we know all the key stuff. Mm-hmm. So we know how to control mashing, we know what's happening in mashing, we know how to control fermentation, we we understand how to get a good foam on beer and so on. Now there's a few I's to be dotted and T's to be crossed, and
some minutiae to be.
But it's just finishing stuff off, if you like. And we know a lot about flavour stability, which is the biggest, as you'll find out, the biggest and the most complicated challenge facing brewers, because it's so complicated. But even then, we know how to increase the shelf life of beer. It's basically keep out the oxygen and keep it cold. It's not, yeah. So there's a lot of good science to be done, and I'm reading a PhD thesis now from Europe, and I'm going to go and examine it soon. And it's fairly esoteric, little part of absolutely little part of all things that can happen in beer. And it's interesting science, and it warrants publication, it warrants a PhD and so on. But I really don't see it improving shelf life anytime soon. So it's not like some walks of life and some sciences that are, we really do need answers, and many of those are in the medical field. When it comes to beer, we know how to make beer, and beer is fairly cheap. So, that's why the technological emphasis in the brewing industry is, well, how can we do away with too many people? How can we analyze things automatically by remote control? How can we lower the cost of packaging materials? Mm-hmm. How can we speed up packaging? Those sorts of, it's the logistics that are far more important than, what is the absolute, N-terminal amino acid in a hydrophobic polypeptide that stabilizes bubbles. We don't need to know.
I had a similar question on that note. Yeah, so like, what is the next big research field in brewing chemistry, not including Joe's work on citric acid, which is doing right now?
Ascorbic acid.
Is it
ascorbic acid? Yeah, not citric acid.
Really?
Ascorbic acid. That in itself, that's a great example of ascorbic acid. You know, people have been told about putting vitamin C into beer for years, and it doesn't bloody work. And then we had the idea, myself and Kanauchi, well actually, in fairness, me, but Makoto did all the research. You know, is there an enzyme in malt that oxidizes ascorbic acid? And the answer is yes. And what does it use? It uses oxygen, so it scavenges the oxygen. So that is, you know, that is potentially one of the things that could really change the process. If people are prepared to put ascorbic acid into the mash, or ascorbate into the mash, then it might just answer a lot of problems. That may lead to a significant improvement in stability.
Oxidation.
Yeah. But in terms of, you know, it's got to be in that flavour stability area, and quite honestly, I think it's much more likely to be a packaging issue than anything else. How do you design a package that, you know, if the beer's in that package, it will survive any abuse that it gets as it travels from A to B, particularly exported beer. Now, you know, logically
transport
speaking,
conditions.
it's called a thermos flask or something like that. It's something that will hold the beer really as cold as possible without freezing it for the longest time. So, you know, it's going to be that sort of solution. It's not. And then the other way is, you know, the other thing you could argue is, well, that's going to be, and this is what people have been talking about, so have some sort of thing on a label that changes colour in relation to what it's been exposed to. And people are talking about that, and they're saying, well, you know, we can tell, you know, water has the heat of use that this has received. There was a study I was at not long ago from Asahi, and they showed that as they were shipping Superdry around the world, it was hitting more than 40 degrees Celsius for days on end.
Cargo ships.
So if you've got a label which says, well, this is what's happened, and people say, well, that's it, we're rejected. But the question is,
how do you ship it without?
Well, no, the question, there's that, but the question is, oh shit, you know, hell, you know, we know it's going to happen, therefore we're shooting ourselves in the foot, because people will buy it anyway, even if it's stale.
Yeah.
See the point? So they're going to say, well, why should we do that? And so you've really got to believe in it. And in fairness, the old Anheuser-Busch, they believed in it. You know, they believe in the born-on date. And if something exceeded the born-on date, send it back. Send it back. We don't want people to drink stale beer. And that is, it's a state of mind. You know, Ken Grossman is serious about it. He believes in the best. And if anybody's going to put some sort of detector system on there to show what happened to the beer, it would be a company like that. But most companies are going to say, oh no, it's like,
it's bad for business.
Nelson or whatever he was, covered his eyes up, I see no ships. You know, so it'll be in that sort of area. But I don't think the next great development is going to be, you know, a piece of chemistry or biochemistry. I think it's going to be a piece of engineering.
Really? Okay.
Whatever that would be. Now, there are some people, of course, and I'm sure I've talked about it too much recently, but there are some people who say, well, the real future is in sensory science, in that if you could come up with a beer flavour in a bottle, and you come up with Pilsner flavour and Märzen flavour and, you know, black IPA flavour and all the different flavours, Hefeweizen flavour, and basically just make a bland beer and add that flavour to it.
Like a soda syrup kind of dispenser kind of thing.
Now, some people, I mean, the very concept offends me. But you know, you can imagine that there are some people who'd say, you know, I don't think I've mentioned it yet. We did a study where one of my students did make a beer by adding some flavors to vodka. And the people we gave it to, they didn't give a shit about how we made it. It didn't bother them. They didn't like it very much. But when we said, when they just thought it was another beer, they didn't like it very much. Then we said, well, actually, we cheated and we've made it from vodka. They didn't care.
Did you try it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I knew what it was. So I'm predisposed.
Bit of bias going in.
Crap, you know.
Yeah.
So that could be, and that would have to be driven. Like the other thing that you got to realise is that it's laws that drive things, and taxation, these sorts of things, and that's why the Hoboshu and third category products in Japan that are made with very low or no malt, they're big sellers. Despite the fact they're nowhere near as good as the beer, they're big sellers because they're so much cheaper. So if they change the tax laws in here to favour better environmental solutions, in other words, if they started taxing malt, but they let you make beer by adding flavours to alcohol, there'll be a lot of people that will be doing it that way, because they just argue that, well, beer's a thing of the past, now we have beer-flavoured beverages or something. And, but if it was tax advantage, it was advantageous to do that, and people were making money that way, it would drive it. It would drive it. So it's like the whole marijuana thing at the moment. It's all about legislation, isn't it? And if the feds made it legal, so at the moment, in Canada, Canadians, now it's legal at the federal level in Canada, but they can be denied access to the United States because they consume cannabis at the federal level. So the whole business of that, and so in the world of brewing, if you changed all the penalties and made it really expensive to be using hops, or really expensive using different types of malt, and the darker the malt, the more expensive it is, it would drive the products that people make.
Absolutely. Yeah. Have there been shifts and barriers to entry into the brewing industry? In the past, people would enter through the packaging line and work their way up to brewer, but has that changed the last 20, 30, 40
basically,
years?
In the so-called craft industry, people just join as a pair of hands and boots.
Helping out the tap room. Yeah,
help out wherever.
Yeah.
And then progressively, those that enjoy it and like it and are prepared to take the abject low pay, they stick around, and then they learn how to do different jobs, and then they consider themselves brewers. And then sometimes they come to places like UC Davis, and then the lights go on, and they go, ha! So that's why we do that. I get it. That's why we have that temperature. That's why we do this. So no, I don't think the routes have changed terribly much. Some bigger companies have got different schemes, graduate trainee schemes. And that, one of the best companies is not a brewing company, it's a winemaking company, Gallo. I mean, they're great with new recruits, and they rotate them through the different departments, give them time in all of them so they get a feel for the whole business.
Show them the ropes.
And Anheuser-Busch InBev are starting to do that now. Coors have historically been good at doing that as well. But no, the fundamental. It is. When I first joined it was at the tail end in the UK of what they used to call the apprentice system. And for some people that meant going work for another company. So you'd have the kid from a brewing company. So it might be a second name, Lees. So young Mr. Lees would go off and work for another brewing company to learn the way they do things, and then come back to develop through their company. So all that was going on, and so on. A lot more qualifications these days. The Institute of Brewing and Distilling, expanding the portfolio of qualifications that people can have at different levels.
Educational.
Yeah. So they might be somebody who comes off hired off the street to go work in the cellar, and they can do a fundamental qualification which introduces them to the whole of the brewing process. Multiple choice questions and all that sort of thing. and then they'll go to the next level, and then the next level, and then finally there's the master brewer level, which is where they have to show their competence at doing, working in all of the in senior roles in all of the aspects of the brewery. Now that used to be called the diploma. The diploma is something else these days. But so some of these exams have been around for a long while, but increasingly they've been spread to bring in more people. So on the one hand, it's great for making sure people are better knowledgeable about the business they're in. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, it's great for cash flow into the Institute of Brewing and Distilling, because they're basically a professional examination establishment, which I used to be the president until relatively recently. So that's happening, and the other thing that's happening is an increase in the number of the attention of educating the drinker. So in this country you have the sommelier, do they call it the sommelier?
Sommelier.
No,
or Cicerone.
The Cicerone program. And in the UK, IBD again has the Beer and Cider Academy. And this is educating people so that they can appreciate beer styles, presentation of beer, serving of beer, all of those things. What's
your opinion on like the Cicerone stuff?
Yeah, people always ask me about the Cicerone thing, and I haven't really delved into it too much. The concept I know is a good one. I know the guy who runs it. In fact, his sister is married to the guy who founded Lagunitas. So the concept and what they're trying to achieve, I think, is a good one. Mm-hmm. I haven't delved into the material. I don't know to what extent it's BS.
It's very in depth, actually.
I don't doubt it is, but whether it's founded on, to what extent it's in depth, or is it?
It's very style focused.
Yeah, does it pervade sort of some of the prejudices? I'm in the business of knocking out prejudices, like we're doing a paper at the moment on lagering and prolonged maturation. It's a complete waste of time. But are they perpetuating these sorts of myths, or are they dealing in hard facts? And when it comes to styles, I've just something else I'm working on at the moment is a new book in praise of beer, and I've been working today on the styles chapter, and it's very difficult because styles overlap.
Oh yeah.
So somebody's Märzen is somebody else's Pilsner.
A beer to garden, a saison, it just depends on where you are.
Yeah. And the overlap is it's what you say it is.
Yeah.
That's a bit. And I often say, I might have said to class, I don't know, you can bring in, somebody will bring in 10 Märzens, 10 Pilsners and 10 Helles and muddle them up and say, okay, sort them out. Put the Pilsners over here, and I don't know anybody that could do that, because they say, well, that's clearly got more of a hop character than that, therefore that's obviously
by Pilsner. Color alone you can Pilsner.
You should hope so.
Yeah.
But some people have Pilsners that are relatively richly coloured, And you look at a Miller truck and it says classic Pilsner taste. Well, I'm sorry, I have to disagree. So where would you put that, And so it's what you say it is. And some people say, well, that's an amber ale. Well, is it? Or is it, is it this, So, and of course, then they'll reinvent, they'll bring in a brand new style because somebody's, so I'm not sure if in the American Brewers Association these days, is there a category for black IPAs? I don't know. I mean, they never existed until somebody is, So says, oh well, we got that category now, and bits of animal beer, gonads and semen, civet shit. That's my new favourite. Fed cocoa nibs to civets and take the shit and put that in the beer. I mean, and they wonder why the wine guys get the moral high ground, and why people look at wine and say, well, that's good. I want to drink that because that's sophisticated and not childish. Yeah. Anyway, I drink.
Okay, so I know you used to want to be a goaltender.
Goalkeeper.
goalkeeper.
Yeah, goaltender's ice hockey, goalkeeper's football.
So what would you see your life like if you pursued that
Down there.
route?
Picture that. Not down there.
Hmm?
Yeah, the big frame at the bottom down there.
Ah. Wow.
What did I... Go on, ask the question again.
So if you had gone that route instead of the one you did, where would you find yourself?
I have no idea. I mean, scrappy probably.
Scrappy.
But there's the thing well, I'll tell you the story. I mean, I dreamed of being a Wolves goalkeeper. I spent hours and hours throwing. I had a ball, a plastic ball, and it was burst. It was a burst plastic football, so it had shrunk in size, and one edge of it was flat.
Mm.
And I used to spend hours throwing that against the wall. And if it hit the curved part, it bounced straight back. If it hit an edge or a corner or a flat part, it would come off at some crazy angle, and I would dive and catch it. I was very acrobatic, mobile, you know. And I was okay. I played at university, and what I should have done was go down to, get on the train, go to 80 miles down to where my team was, and knock on the door, and say, "I'm here, give me a try." That's what I should have done. But I didn't dream of it. And I went to a rugby playing school. I played rugby for the school. But that's not bloody good if you want to become a footballer. So, I didn't play for a team. Only later I played for the Bass. And so it never happened. It just never happened. Years later, when I just joined Bass, my team, Wolverhampton Wanderers, they were going through the pan. They're going down the pan. And I read an article in the newspaper which said that they weren't going to be publishing their match day program anymore. And I thought, well, that's ridiculous. You don't have a program, you don't have a club. So I contacted them. This is what I should have done when I wanted to be a goalkeeper. I contacted them and said, "I can do it for you. I can write you an article." And they say, "Yeah, great." The first one is in that program there on the top left-hand side where it says Wanderers Review. That was the very first program I ever wrote in for Wolves, against my hometown team, Wigan Athletic. And I became a regular fixture at Wolverhampton. I wrote a book about the goalkeepers. I wrote magazines, newspapers. I still write on our website today. So the moral is you make it happen, And there's some people in the UK, they know me far better for writing about football, soccer, than about beer. You'll say, "I'm Charlie Bamforth. How do you do?" And I know the people at the club and behind the scenes and so on. And so I could have gone for a trial, and they could have turned around and said, "Yeah," but much more likely they said, "No, you're a pile of shit." But at least I would have stopped dreaming about it, So how would it have turned out? I don't know. But you can say that about anything.
Exactly.
I was with Bass. So I was research manager of Bass, so I was responsible for a hell of a lot. Very high grade, beautiful car, all the gas, everything was paid for. It was
living the life.
And then, it made me work for it. And then they said, "We've got to have the smooth edges knocked off. You've got to go and work in a brewery." So I went off to become a QA manager, which was a substantially lower graded job, but they paid me at the higher rate. Mm-hmm. So I was by far and away the highest paid quality person in the company. Still a very nice car. So everything was at the higher level, but they wanted me to get that experience, and which was, it was fantastic that they did it, and thank God I did it. But after 2 years, I was so pissed off with it. After I've learned everything I've got to learn, I'm coming back. And they said, "No, there's no job for you now. We're not ready for it." And so I'm leaving. He said, "You can't leave." I said, "All right, you tell me why I can't leave." And so I went back to the Brewing Research Foundation, and they paid for me to go back. They said, "Would you become the research manager if we pay all your So Bass paid me to leave. I mean, really high-class problem. But then, of course, I came over here. I didn't come here for the money. So the question is, what would have happened if I'd stayed with Bass? If I'd stayed with Bass, of course, they were bought out. So they were bought out by Interbrew, the forerunner of AB InBev, and then they sold half of it to Coors. My pension is with Coors. But what would have happened to me? I mean, I don't know. I could have stayed there. Who knows? I could have gone off to another brewing company. I could have gone to Belgium. I could have gone to Golden, Colorado. I was offered the research director's role at Milwaukee once. I turned it down. It was too bloody cold. So you don't know. You don't know. All I can say is, I dreamed of being a Wolves goalie, which I did, and that obsession with Wolves did help me in that it meant, because I knew a lot about the club. I did a lot of studying and reading and also watching, of course. And so when it came to writing about it, I was pretty. In fact, one of my best friends now was a very well-known Wolves player. And all my cuttings, actually, I kept scrapbooks. I gave them to him. He lives in Vancouver, he's Canadian, and I presented him with all the cuttings, all about his career and also that I'd kept without ever thinking I'd ever meet the guy. And he's now done his autobiography, and he's sending me a copy. So who knows? All things happen. Well, that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't made it my business to basically knock on the door at Wolves. And I should have done that when I wanted to be a player. My mother would never allow me.
So, what does it take to be successful, skill-wise, and as a person in the industry or out of the industry, just in general?
Just in general?
Yeah.
Well, make it your business to get on, which is what I've just described. Hard work, genuine hard work, aptitude. So do the things you're good at. I'd be a lousy brewer, and I'd hate it. I would hate. I just don't have the patience, and I don't have the commitment. Practically, I mean, with me, it's everything's up here. You know.
Yeah.
When it comes to practice, I'm the world's lousy handyman or anything like that. Oh, dreadful. And I don't enjoy it. You know, we just had new door put on by somebody, and I've got to I've got to prime the trim, and I'm mortified by the prospect of putting a bit of priming on a piece of wood around the front door. I mean, it fills me with distaste. But doing research and finding things out and applying intellect and so that's what I really enjoy. You know? So you've got to find, you know, ideally what you enjoy, and if you enjoy it, that's first and foremost what you should do. More so than, well, that'll pay me a lot more money, so I'll do that, but I'll be miserable.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
So, you know, I could have stayed where I was in the UK in the industry, and I could have come here today. I didn't do this for the money. Let me tell you, I took a serious, you know, there's no fancy company.
What was your major driving factor?
What was the driving factor? To do this job.
Yeah.
When I realized at university, 1970, right? Okay. Parents probably with kids at the end. Anyway, when I arrived in 1970, I realized I still had that vague belief that I might play football. Staggered through, not exactly staggered, but I didn't really fool myself with glory doing my studies at school. But I got to Hull University and studied biochemistry, and I decided I was going to work really hard, and I did. I drank really hard as well, but anyway, that's beside the point. But when I was listening to people teaching me about biochemistry and so on, some of those guys, I was going, wow, that's great. I'd love to do that. So in 1970, I realized that the idea of teaching at a university really appealed.
Just instant fascination.
Yeah, I was, and I can remember I used to go and see my then girlfriend, now my wife, and I'd be giving lectures as I was walking around. I'd walk about 5 miles to go see her, and I'd be lecturing. I'd be talking as I was going. So I hope nobody ever listened to me, heard me. Anyway, and then I did my PhD, the postdoc, and then went to I was doing the research angle. But even then it was always that, and I was offered a position in 1982, 83, at Imperial College, which is one of the foremost universities in the country. and they offered me a lectureship. I'll never forget it. I did the interview, and all these very starchy, stuck-up, pompous, I can see them now, pompous people. And I thought, well, I'm not going to get this job, so I let it rip. I let them know what I thought. And I was really, I said, well, you know, and they were being brewing, and I was saying, look, this is the way it is. And I thought, well, I'm not going to get the job, I'll just tell them the way it is. Well, what I didn't realise, the top guy was lapping this up. He was loving this. He was absolutely, because he was a northerner like me, and he was just drinking this in. And he came into his room afterwards, poured me a glass of sherry, as you do, and he said, that was marvellous. You're my man. And basically I was offered the job, and it felt awful. I don't like this. This is awful. I went home, I told my wife, and I said, you know, I want to take it, because that's what I've dreamed of doing. But it really doesn't feel right. And I went in next day and saw Bernard with the broken paper lips. And I said, I ought to tell you I'm leaving. He said, yeah, I know. I said, how do you know? He said, of course I know. I said, well, I'm going to Imperial College. He said, no, you're not. I said, what do you mean, no, I'm not? He said, you're going to Bath. I said, what do you mean I'm going to Bath? He said, I've been negotiating for ages. They want you to go to Bath as research manager. And thank you. You know, angels with blue eyes. Not only because he was near Wolves, so I could go watch Wolves with a season ticket. And it felt great. But always at the back of my mind, there was this, you know, academic thing. And then my dear friend, my closest friend in the industry, Graham Stewart, left Labatt and came to become the professor at Heriot Watt in Edinburgh. And he asked me to become the visiting professor of brewing. And it was just great. I'd go to Edinburgh and give lectures and so on. And so when they wanted the position here filled, they wanted somebody who'd been in academia, somebody who had been in the industry, and somebody who had a long research record. Give us a job, I'll do that. And I was the only guy on the planet who checked all the boxes. And that's why that's why it's hard now.
What do you think about like networking? The significance of networking and connections?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it depends. It depends. You can do it. You can overdo it. You know.
Yeah,
but I wouldn't be in this role if I didn't have a network.
Yeah.
So if I didn't know Graham Stewart, if I hadn't established a rapport with Graham over a long time, I wouldn't have been the guy he invited to be the visiting professor of brewing at Heriot Watt. And if I hadn't been invited to do that, I wouldn't have been in this job, because I wouldn't have had that academic presence. Now, the Brewing Research Foundation, going there in the first place, had nothing to do with networking. That was just me answering a job. But why did I stay and do a PhD? Because I didn't know what the hell to do. And one of the lecturers at Hull said, I said, what are you going to do? I said, I have no idea. He said, can you cook? I said, yeah. He said, you can do research then. It's only bloody cookery. All you have to do is follow a recipe and provide a little bit of, think about it. If you want to create a new dish, you've got to think, well, how do I do that? That's all I did. So I said, well, I should do that. And that's why I decided. So it's not something that's always networking. It's doing things well, not shying away, and taking advice when it's reasonable, not straightforward, but there's no master plan, but being noticed is important. I'll give you another example. When I was a young sprog at Brewing Research Foundation, I was basically instructed to go and be the recorder for the London section of the Institute of Brewing, as it was then called. And what the recorder was, you go to a meeting and you take the notes. Mm-hmm. So this met in a very historic organisation, a historic pub on Tottenham Court Road in London, and the Horseshoe. And I would take the notes and then be written up in the journal. Of itself, I wasn't paid anything for it, but I got to meet people. and I got to know the Institute of Brewing, and then something else came, and eventually I became president. So it's doing the small things. It's doing the small things, and you know, at that time I never thought, well, if I do this now, then in 2014 I'll become president. There was no plan, you know. And if I do this, then do this, and then I'll end up at UC Davis.
No firm goals, but just possibilities.
Yeah, possibilities, you know.
Right.
And founded on it all was an enjoyment of what I was doing. So as I've explained, the only thing that I didn't enjoy was being the quality assurance manager at the Runcorn Brewery. But did it benefit me? If I hadn't done that, I couldn't have told the stories I tell now about, you know, this is the importance of this, and let me give you an illustration of why it is, and paint some pictures of it, you know, the business of, you know, the beer turning blue, you know, because you don't read that in a textbook.
No.
You don't read those things in a textbook. These are things that do happen behind the scenes. And that's why it's critical, I think, in a role like mine, and whoever takes after me, that they understand the real world, you know. So sometimes you have to take a slight detour to enable you to, you know. So Tony Portnow and Gus Guthrie at Bass insisting I went to Runcorn, that was the best possible thing they could have done for me. I hated them for it. I bloody hated them for it at the time. But thank God they did it. In fact, in Nottingham this time, I went to lunch with them. I said, you know, I've got to thank you, because I won't be in Davis now if you hadn't made me do that. But I did hate him for it. I remember giving Guthrie hell because they advertised my job before they told me I was leaving. They had to advertise for my successor. I said, what are you advertising for? I've not gone anywhere. No, but you are going.
Oh.
Yeah.
How are you doing for time?
I've got somebody coming in a bit, so a few more minutes is fine.
Okay, a few more minutes. Let's see. What are your feelings on craft and the industry going in the next 10, 20 years?
Well, I hate the word craft. The word craft is irrelevant because all brewers, properly trained brewers, should be craftspeople. To me, a craftsperson is somebody who, with passion, does things well. And I don't think you can identify that on the basis of size. So I know some fantastic brewers in Anheuser-Busch and Coors, probably better brewers than you get in most other places. There are some people who perceive companies like Sierra Nevada and Coopers in Adelaide, my two favourite brewing companies, they perceive those as being too big and somehow outgrown sort of the craft notion, which is ridiculous, because they are the best brewers, you know. And yeah, there are some great small-scale brewers. You know, Chris, although he wasn't one of my students, but Chris up at Berryessa, Chris Smith, is a great brewer. But I can tell you a few shit brewers who brew in buckets as well. So the good thing about it is it engenders interest in beer. You know, there are people who probably wouldn't have shown any interest in beer before, when all they had was, you know, Bud and Coors, perhaps Blue Ribbon, who wouldn't show an interest, but now they'll go to usually a fairly sordid-looking venue, hardly sort of refined, like where you go sip wine. So you probably got a factory somewhere. A warehouse, yeah. But that's okay. But at least they're going there and they're sampling beer, so that's good. What I hate is when either side attacks the other. That fills me with disgust, and that's why I'm not a fan of Boston Beer Company, because that's how they set up their original marketing on rubbishing imported beers, rightly or wrongly. You shouldn't do it. And arrogant bastard,
Stone.
Same name, same surname. I don't know what it is about them. Rubbishing people, talking about yellow fizzy liquid. You know, the so-called yellow fizzy liquids are extremely hard to brew and enjoyed by millions of people. So there must be something right about them. And it's not just marketing, sales. If somebody started marketing shit, you wouldn't go and get a knife and fork and start eating it, would you? Probably. I've never used that one before. And I hate it when the big guys try to attack the small guys, which is usually from a business perspective and trying to drive them out of business and whether they and
distribution laws,
all that, just getting onto a distribution truck and all of those things. It's very tough. So on balance, I applaud the so-called craft movement generally, but I won't do that at the same time. I won't rubbish the big guys. I will rubbish the big guys for some of their business practices, but in terms of technology and technical ability, they are exemplary. It's when it comes to sales and marketing and banking other people's money and so on, and delaying when they'll pay you and all that crap, that really offends me. And in the same token, you've got the campaign for real ale in England, which in nothing you presumably encountered that. I mean, a great notion and championing beer and championing pubs and my personal favourite style of beer. But at the same time, it's utterly wrong that they should say, well, this is the only beer that's worth drinking.
Yeah.
That is stupid. That is so stupid. So nothing's perfect. Nothing's perfect. But
there's a lot of pettiness.
The basic concept of celebrating beer is a good thing. But I rail against people when they try to do it at somebody else's expense.
Okay. Do you have time for 2 more quick ones? Okay. So, what can the U.S. brewer learn from the UK brewing industry, and vice versa?
Well, use degrees Celsius. That would be very good. The U.S. brewing industry could learn how to make good cask-conditioned ales, and it would be very hard, but it's certainly something they could learn. They could also learn, in my opinion, and I think it's just a cultural thing, but my God, the English pub is damn sight nicer than an American bar.
I prefer it.
So an English pub, a really genuine English pub, is quite a delightful place to drink beer. Now some of them these days are.
You can hear people talk.
Yeah. So that's people say, what do you miss from England? And Diane and I would agree that the thing is, we may go to the theatre or something, and then we'd say, well, let's just have a drink, and you go to the pub and it'd be quite civilized. I can't take my wife into bars with this men leaning on the bar like that, or crazy noise value levels or whatever, and so that they could learn from that. UK and what they could learn. I don't know. I think the US has more to learn from the UK than the other way around. And I do enjoy. I mean, the thing I like in the UK now that has come in is the preparedness to use more hops. It's well known. When I first came here 20 years ago, I used to say these beers are far too hoppy. But now the beers that I was saying are far too hoppy are not hoppy enough for me now. Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is a great beer, but it's not hoppy enough for me.
It's like spicy food.
It's got to be torpedo now. At least. Which is interesting, and it just shows that your own personal. And it's probably because as I get older, and my palate degenerates, it's got to have stronger flavours to actually touch the side. Probably. Plus the fact, hops are kind of addictive. And the second question.
Yes. So how do you feel about your legacy and impact on the brewing industry?
Oh, it's just been absolutely fantastic. There's no question. I've been a legend.
I was actually going to ask you, how does it feel to be a legend?
No. What I always say is what Charles de Gaulle said. And his actual words were, "The graveyard is full of indispensable men." I usually change that to people, but what am I most proud of? Look around. You know, you don't know what. I'm not just talking about this office. I'm talking about the facility.
Yeah.
You know, you didn't see when I arrived in Davis in 1999. It was awful. It was decrepit, and we had an old brewery, which is now all we've got is a photograph of it. Actually, the brewery's with Sierra Nevada, the museum people. I had no laboratory. The doors were falling off. There wasn't even a spectrophotometer or a pH meter. There was nothing.
Just in disrepair or what?
Oh, it was just a mess. It was a disgrace. It was a disgrace. And the person I succeeded here, they need to look at. I mean, they made themselves a very nice living with consultancy and businesses, but they didn't put anything like they should have done into upgrading and improving and sustaining the facilities. Anyway, that being the case, so now, I mean, I was the chairman of the department when we moved into these buildings, and I raised the money with Melissa Hayworth to put in the pilot brewery and the brewing facility and a building, and stocked it. And we've got amazing equipment now, and all that I've done. Plus the fact, you know, I've now, you know, there are classes now that occupy far more students than ever before. So when people say to me, "Oh, I wish you'd been there when I was at Davis. I'd have studied brewing." I said, "You could have studied brewing, but you didn't know it existed because nobody pushed it." So the legacy, 40 years, not only UC Davis, but in terms of UC Davis, the facilities and the programs and the presence, far more on the radar UC Davis than it ever was.
You came here in 99, correct?
99, but I've been in the industry since 78. But in terms of the industry as a whole, I guess my research output, you know, we came up with the model for the cell wall of barley and how the cell wall breaks down, which is very important in the malting and brewing operations.
Absolutely.
All of the work on lager flavor, DMS, foam. We've done more than anybody on the foam. And the freshness. We were the first people to show that it's reactive oxygen species that cause beer to go stale. And people are continuing to build on that original research. And there's some other things as well, some other research areas that, and it's very nice to have been recognised for that recently with the Horace Brown Medal and a few other awards. Yeah. So, but you know, that's it. I'm just one small cog.
You've made a huge impact.
Yeah, you're right. Luckily, it's my wife keeps my feet on the ground.
You're still a legend.
Yeah. So, all right. What's the class?
It's UWP business writing. We have to do a paper on the industry you want to go into and get someone that's